While my 16-year-old son was being wheeled into emergency surgery, my husband froze our joint bank accounts to host a lavish birthday party for his 2-8-year-old mistress. He thought cutting off my money at my most vulnerable moment would force me into submission. He thought I was just a naive, clueless stay-at-home mom. But he forgot one crucial detail: the multi-million-dollar company he was using to fund his affair actually belongs to my late father. And I was holding the ultimate trump card to take it all back. I still remember it vividly. That afternoon, the Seattle sky was a murky gray, like an old, dust-covered pane of glass. Out in the hospital corridor, the sound of the medicine carts rolled monotonously against the cold tile floor. The hushed voices of patients' families were so quiet, it felt as though everyone was terrified that speaking just a little louder might force fate to change its course. As for me, I stood dead in my tracks in front of the billing counter, one hand gripping my son's admission papers, the other holding out the bank card that, for over a decade, my husband had called our family card. But in reality, to me, it felt more like a leash than a means of spending. The cashier looked at her monitor, then up at me. Her eyes were so sympathetic that I guessed something was wrong before she even opened her mouth. "Ma'am, this card has been locked. The system says the primary account holder requests a temporary hold on all transactions." I heard every single word clearly. Yet it took me a few seconds to process their full meaning. Locked. Requested by the primary account holder. It wasn't a system glitch, it wasn't maxed out, and it certainly wasn't a bank error. It meant that my own husband, Carter, the man who held the title of father to the boy lying on the 7th floor with surgical wounds that hadn't even dried yet, had personally cut off the only source of funds I could use, right at the exact moment our son needed his medical deposit paid. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my throat ached with a tight lump. "Could you please check it again for me? My son just had emergency surgery, and I need to pay the deposit." The cashier softened her voice, as if afraid I would shatter right then and there. "I've checked it twice, ma'am. The card was locked by a direct request from the primary account holder. Do you have cash or another way to transfer the funds?" Cash. Another way to transfer funds. Those two options might sound simple to most people, but to me, they were humiliatingly out of reach. From the day I married Carter, and especially since he took the CEO chair at the interior design firm my father had built, every penny in our house was controlled by him. He said women who stay at home to raise kids don't need to carry much money. He said I was clumsy, too trusting, and bad at financial management. He said he had the right to control the money he made, and all I needed to do was quietly take care of the cooking, the house, and our son. I had listened to those words for so long that on some days, looking in the mirror, I couldn't even recognize that the silent woman staring back was the only daughter of Arthur Hayes, a notoriously strict but decent man who built his company with integrity and sweat. I took a step back from the counter, my face burning with shame while my hands were freezing cold. I dialed Carter's number for the 17th time since last night. Just long, endless rings before going to voicemail. The text I had sent him read, "Noah had severe abdominal pain. I brought him to the ER. The doctor said he needed immediate surgery. Please pick up. He is out of the woods, but I need to pay the hospital deposit." It sat there, completely ignored, without a single sign of a reply. Lying in the hospital bed right then was my son, Noah, 16 years old. A skinny, quiet boy who, from a young age, was used to swallowing his sadness because he was afraid of making his mother worry. Last night, when Noah was doubled over in pain at the foot of the stairs, sweating so profusely his hair was soaked, I only had time to throw on an old coat and call an ambulance. On the way to the hospital, Noah held my hand, his voice so weak I had to lean in close to hear him. "Mom? Is Dad coming?" I lied. I told him Dad was in an important meeting and would rush over as soon as he got the news. I said it because I couldn't bear to let my son go into the operating room with the heartbreaking realization that his father wasn't picking up the phone, didn't care, and wasn't there. But the truth was, even I didn't know where Carter was until I called the company. The person who answered was Thomas, my late father's longtime secretary. Even after Carter took over, Thomas stayed on out of loyalty to my family. His voice was naturally deep and calm, but when I told him Noah was in the hospital, He went silent for a very long time. So long that I could hear the rustling of papers on the other end of the line. Maya. How is Noah doing? He just got out of surgery. The doctor said he's past the danger zone. But Carter isn't answering his phone, and the family card is locked. Do you know where he is? Another pause. This time, I heard Thomas exhale very softly. Maya. There is something. I don't know if I should tell you this right now. My heart suddenly pounded. Please. Just tell me. The CEO isn't at the office this afternoon. He booked a private event hall at a riverside resort over in Kirkland. He went with Vivian from the sales department. The name was not unfamiliar. A 28-year-old girl who dressed flashily, spoke as sweet as honey, and had been continuously promoted by Carter despite being at the company for less than 2 years. I had heard the whispers, seen the vague texts pop up on my husband's phone, and smelled the strange perfume lingering on his collar late at night. But every time I asked, I was met with a look of disdain and a cold reply. Is your brain only capable of thinking about such low-class garbage? I stood in the hospital courtyard, the wind blowing through the trees, listening to Thomas speak. Every word was like a needle quietly piercing my chest. Today is Vivian's birthday. I heard the accounting department say the venue rental was nearly $15,000. The CEO told them to put it under important client entertainment. This morning, he also called the bank to lock your supplementary card. He said it was to teach you how to budget. $15,000. While my son was lying on an operating table, his life hanging by a thin thread, his father was using $15,000 to throw a birthday party for his mistress, and locked his wife's card to teach her how to budget. I didn't cry. Strangely, in that moment, I didn't shed a tear. Perhaps when pain exceeds the limit of human endurance, tears turn into stone, lying heavy in your chest until you can no longer breathe. I opened Vivian's social media page. Her latest photo had been posted just 20 minutes ago. She was wearing a red dress, leaning her head on the shoulder of a man whose face was half cropped out. But I still recognized Carter's watch. The watch I had bought for him by selling the earrings my mother left me to celebrate his promotion. The caption above the photo made my hands shake. Someone once said love must be proven through actions. Today, he froze the card of a certain ungrateful person just to dedicate this entire day to me. Thank you for choosing me. I read that sentence over and over again, then looked up at the 7th floor window where my son was lying alone after his surgery. For so many years, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping a home. I thought staying silent was protecting my child. I thought that by taking the loss, my family would remain intact. But at that exact second, I realized a very bitter truth. Some homes don't collapse because the woman finally speaks up. They collapsed a long time ago, and she's just been standing in the rubble, lying to herself that it's still a shelter. I took a deep breath and called Thomas back. Tom, please help me secure all the invoices and receipts related to today's party. Don't let Carter know. Thomas lowered his voice. What are you planning to do, Maya? I looked at the useless piece of plastic in my hand, then slowly snapped it in half in my palm. I just want to take back what rightfully belongs to my son. With that, I hung up and walked back into the hospital. My footsteps were steady, but inside, I was no longer the same woman. And I knew that from this moment on, Carter would never be able to fathom that the wife he treated like a shadow, the woman he thought only knew how to bow her head and beg for money, was actually holding the final key to pull him out of the chair he thought he'd sit in forever. I returned to the hospital room. As dusk settled outside, the hallway lights cast a pale yellow glow onto the tiles like the kind of light reserved for days when people are forced to grow up all over again in silence. Noah was still lying there, his face pale because the anesthesia hadn't fully worn off, his lips dry, his thin hand resting lightly on the edge of the blanket. I set my bag down on the chair next to the bed, gently stroked his hair, and sat beside him, quietly watching his every breath, as if looking at the last piece of my life worth holding on to. Are you back, Mom? Noah opened his eyes, his voice raspy. I'm here. Just go to sleep. The doctor says you're recovering well. Noah looked toward the door. His eyes were tired, but there was still a very childish anticipation in them. Dad hasn't come yet? That question dropped into the middle of the stark white room. It was soft, but it made my heart ache as if someone was crushing it. I had prepared so much calmness to face Carter, to face Vivian, to face those filthy receipts. Yet, just one question from my son was enough to choke me up. I leaned over to adjust Noah's blanket, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Dad is busy with work at the company. I already told him, don't overthink it. Your only job right now is to rest and get better. Noah didn't ask anything else, but his silence hurt me more than any words of blame. Growing up, Noah had gotten used to withdrawing into himself whenever his father was mentioned. The parent-teacher conferences Carter missed, the birthdays where he just haphazardly handed over an envelope of cash, the dinners where Noah tried to talk about school but his dad just stared at his phone and snapped, "Eat faster, stop talking nonsense." All of those things had accumulated in the boy's heart like tiny scratches. Not enough to make someone collapse immediately, but enough for a child to grow up feeling he didn't deserve to be fully loved. I held my son's hand and said softly, "Noah, whatever happens in the future, you have to remember that Mom is always by your side." Noah looked at me. Perhaps because the medication was still making his head heavy, he just gave a faint note and drifted back to sleep. I sat there for a long time. When the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor became the only sound in the room, I finally took out my phone. A text from Thomas popped up, brief but enough to make my blood run cold. "Maya, I've secured copies of the venue invoice, the payment request form, and the deposit transfer receipt. But there is something much more serious. This morning, the CEO ordered accounting to prep paperwork to withdraw from the Employee Welfare Fund, citing a national client conference. The amount is $35,000. I read that line over and over, feeling like I was no longer looking at a simple affair. Carter wasn't just betraying his wife and son, he was dragging my father's company through the mud, stealing money from the collective to fund a flashy, fake lifestyle for another woman. To Carter, $35,000 might just be a party, a trip, or some jewelry to make Vivian happy. But to many employees in the company, that was their holiday bonus, their kids' college tuition, their aging parents' medical bills, a small peace of mind after a year of hard work. I texted Thomas back, "Please hold on to everything for me. From now on, you don't need to call me Miss. Just call me Maya like before. And please, don't put yourself in any danger." Thomas replied very quickly, "Even though Mr. Hayes is gone, I still owe him my gratitude. You can count on me, but be careful. The CEO isn't the same man he used to be." I looked at the words "isn't the same" and gave a bitter smile. No, Carter hadn't just recently changed. I was just the one lying to myself, pretending that a sliver of his decency was just hidden behind work and stress. Now, as the hospital lights shone down on my son's pale face, I finally understood that this man had gone too far. So far that if I endured even one more step, the people dragged down with me wouldn't just be myself, but Noah, my father's company, and the people who had trusted my family all these years. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. The screen read "Mother-in-law." Mrs. Henderson, a woman who had lived her entire life for her son's prestige. She was the one who had held my hands on my wedding day and told me that being a daughter-in-law in this family meant knowing how to bite my tongue. Men go out to do great things, women shouldn't fuss over the little things. Back then, I was young. I believed that endurance was a virtue, something that could keep a household in peace. Only later did I realize that biting your tongue in the right place is called grace, but enduring cruelty is just offering yourself up to be trampled on. I answered the phone. Before I could even speak, Mrs. Henderson's sharp, irritated voice rang out. "Maya? Carter told me you're making a scene again over money. If your son is in the hospital, you're the mother, you should handle it first. Why do you keep clinging to your husband? Men have careers, they haven't working to do. They can't just drop everything and run after hospital errands." I closed my eyes, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Mom, Noah just had emergency surgery. Your grandson was in critical condition." Mrs. Henderson paused for exactly 1 second, then lowered her voice as if she were granting me a favor. "Kids get sick, it's normal. Stop using it to pressure your husband." Honestly, since you married into this family, you haven't helped Carter's career at all. Aside from carrying the title of Arthur Hayes's daughter, now Carter is carrying the company on his back. The money is his. If you want to spend it, you need to know your place. I opened my eyes and looked at Noah, sound asleep, his hand slightly twitching from the pain. Maybe in the past, I would have stayed quiet. In the past, I would have apologized just to let it go. But today, beside my son's hospital bed, Mrs. Henderson's words no longer scared me. They only illuminated the very root that had nourished Carter's selfishness all these years. "Mom," I said slowly, "Carter isn't the only one making the money in this family. The company he's running is the one my father left behind. The house you occasionally visit was also bought with my family's assets. And Noah is not a little thing." Dead silence on the other end. Perhaps Mrs. Henderson never expected me to dare speak to her like that. Then, she let out a dry laugh, the laugh of someone used to standing above others. "You're starting to get insolent. I will tell Carter to teach you a lesson. A woman who doesn't know her place will eventually lose everything." I replied very softly, "I'm looking forward to seeing who really loses everything." I hung up before she could say another word. For the first time in years, I wasn't shaking with fear for arguing with my mother-in-law. On the contrary, a strange calm settled over me. It felt as if an old door had finally closed, and behind it, the woman whose soul had grayed from years of enduring had finally stepped outside. I didn't sleep that night. I sat next to Noah, one hand resting on the edge of the bed, the other scrolling back through Vivian's public posts. She didn't hide a thing. The red dress, the fresh flowers, the 3-tier cake, the expensive wine, the luxurious event hall overlooking the river. The passive-aggressive quotes about a married man who had chosen the right person. In the comments, a few of her friends teased, "When are you officially becoming the boss's wife? He spends so much on you, the old one must be furious." Vivian dropped a laughing emoji and replied, "If you don't know how to keep your husband, you just have to deal with it." I screenshotted everything. Every image, every caption, every timestamp. Not because I wanted to cause a jealous scene. I was way past the age of rushing over to pull another woman's hair to fight for a worthless man. What I needed was evidence. The paper trail. The absolute truth so clear that even if Carter used his money, his connections, or his arrogant voice to deny it, he wouldn't be able to spin his way out. Near dawn, Thomas sent another file. Inside was a ledger of unusual expense over the past 6 months. Rent for a luxury apartment in Bellevue, jewelry from a boutique in downtown Seattle, a deposit for a luxury car under Vivian's name but paid through the company account. It totaled over $250,000. I looked at that number. My heart didn't ache anymore, it just turned ice cold. That $250,000 could have paid for Noah's college education. It could have paid salaries on time for so many employees. It could have carried the company through rough months. Yet Carter threw it into a dirty affair, all while parading around as a successful man, the pillar of the family, the one who had the right to make his wife bow her head. The next morning, when the doctor came in to check Noah's incisions, I stood by, listening to every instruction, carefully writing down the medication schedule, the diet, the follow-up dates. Noah looked at me weakly, then suddenly whispered, "You're really tired, aren't you, Mom?" I smiled, leaned down, and kissed his forehead. "I'm not tired. As long as you get better, I can do anything." Noah looked at me a bit longer, then whispered, "Please don't cry by yourself anymore, Mom." I froze. So, this child knew everything. He knew about the nights I stood in the kitchen, facing the wall, wiping my tears. He knew about the times Carter yelled at me in front of him. He even knew that my silence wasn't weakness, but an attempt to keep a roof over his head. I gently squeezed Noah's hand. For the first time in days, tears welled up, but I swallowed them down, I promise. From now on, I won't cry by myself anymore. Right then, my phone rang. It was Carter. After disappearing for more than a day, the supposed father and husband finally called home. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Carter's voice sounded cold and dismissive, as if he were talking to the maid rather than his wife in a hospital. Have you calmed down yet? Having your card locked for a day was probably enough to remind you who feeds this family, right? I looked at Noah, who had turned his face away, pretending to sleep so he wouldn't have to hear his father's voice. My heart clenched, but when I answered, my tone was so calm it even surprised me. Did you call just to say that? Carter scoffed. I'm asking you, has my wife realized her mistake? If you have, go home tonight, cook dinner, and clean the house properly. Don't use the hospital as an excuse to dodge your chores. As for Noah, the doctors are handling it, stop being so dramatic. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then said very softly, all right. I'll come home tonight. Carter hung up, satisfied, absolutely certain I had surrendered. But he didn't know that I wasn't coming home tonight to cook him dinner. I was going back to open my father's old safe, the place that held documents Carter never in his life expected to see. That evening, I left the hospital when Noah was in a deep sleep from his painkillers. Before leaving, I told the nurse repeatedly, if he wakes up and asks for me, tell him I just went home to grab some clothes and will be right back. But deep down, I knew very well this trip home wasn't just to get clothes. It wasn't to cook dinner like Carter had ordered over the phone, and it certainly wasn't to bow my head and apologize like he assumed. I was going home to open the final door, a door that, for years, even I had been too afraid to touch. Because once it was opened, the family I had tried to hold together with silence, with tears, with cold dinners, and with the phrase for the sake of my child would cross the point of no return. The cab drove through the brightly lit streets. The city was as crowded as any other night. People were eating, shopping, laughing. Meanwhile, I sat in the back seat, my hands resting on my purse. Inside was my phone, filled with screenshots of Vivian's posts, the venue invoices, the expense ledger Thomas had sent, and the ruthlessly cold text messages from Carter. I used to think the most painful evidence of a broken marriage was a cheating text, the smell of strange perfume on a husband's shirt, or the name of another woman slipping into your restless sleep. But no. The most painful thing is when that man is still alive and well, has enough energy to spend money, throw parties, and whisper sweet nothings to his mistress, yet lacks the basic human decency to come see his own son after surgery. When I arrived home, I stood in front of the iron gate for a long time. The 3-story house in this quiet suburb looked perfectly complete from the outside. It had a small yard, the tree my father planted when I first moved in, and the stone patio set Carter used to brag to guests that he bought so his wife and son could have a place to drink tea. But only I knew that the inside of this house had been devoid of warmth for a long time. Every dinner was just Noah and me. The head of the table reserved for Carter was always empty. Or, if he was sitting there, his eyes were glued to his phone, his mouth only opening to criticize the soup for being bland. To scold our son for not studying hard enough, or to remind me not to spend money like an ungrateful freeloader. I opened the door. The house was pitch black. Carter wasn't home yet. He was probably still somewhere with Vivian, or driving around with the triumphant smugness of a man who thought that merely locking a credit card, cutting off funds, and having his mother threaten me was enough to force his wife back into her place. I flipped on the living room lights. The harsh white glare flooded the room, making everything look stark and freezing cold. On the table sat the half-empty glass of whiskey Carter had left the day before. Next to it was his jacket, carelessly tossed aside. Peeking out from the pocket was a pink slip of paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt from a jewelry boutique in downtown Seattle. The amount was $8,500, and the note at the bottom read, "Custom bracelet." I looked at the receipt and gave a very soft laugh. $8,500 for Vivian's wrist. But for Noah's hospital deposit, you leave me standing paralyzed at the billing counter with a locked card. I took a photo of the receipt, put everything back exactly as it was, and walked straight to my late father's old study at the end of the hall. It was the quietest room in the house, and the only place Carter rarely entered. He once said the smell of old books and wood gave him a headache, and that looking at my father's belongings only reminded him of the days people whispered he was just a son-in-law riding coattails. I knelt down in front of my father's desk. The portrait of Arthur Hayes sitting there still looked at me with those strict but kind eyes. Back in the day, that look made his employees both respect and love him. To me, it was the gaze of a father who didn't say I love you often but always silently prepared a way out for his daughter. Dad, I whispered, my voice choking up, I'm sorry. I let them trample on your life's work for far too long. I reached under the bottom drawer of the heavy oak desk. There was a small, hidden compartment my father had built himself when he was alive. Right before I married Carter. My dad called me into his office, placed a thick envelope in my hand, and said, Maya, I hope you never have to use this. But life is unpredictable. Your husband might love you today, but tomorrow, when money and power are placed in front of him, people change. Remember this, it's good for a woman to love her husband, but never hand over your entire livelihood to anyone. At the time, I laughed, even blaming my dad for thinking the worst of Carter. I believed in the man who bowed his head before my father and promised to take care of me forever. I believed that starting out with nothing would make us cherish each other more. I believed that human decency was enough to keep a man from changing. It turned out, the naive one wasn't Carter. It was me. I opened the hidden compartment and took out the yellowed envelope. The old glue gave way easily under my fingertips. Inside was a stack of documents carefully wrapped in moisture-proof plastic. I laid them out on the rug, reading each page under the warm lamplight. At first, my eyes scanned slowly, but the more I read, the harder my heart pounded. It was the shareholder agreement, my father's private will, a conditional proxy of management, and a binding commitment Carter had signed before taking the CEO position. The documents explicitly stated that the controlling shares still belonged to him. Carter was merely the acting executive representative during the time I voluntarily abstained from management. If Carter violated business ethics, misused company assets to the detriment of shareholders or the founder's family, his executive powers could be suspended immediately the moment I, alongside the legacy board of directors, activated the safeguard clause. My fingers stopped right there and lingered for a long time. For the past 10 years, Carter kept saying the company was his, the money was his, the prestige was his, and I was just the woman leeching off her husband's glory. He didn't know or deliberately forgot that the chair he sat in never truly belonged to him. My father had seen much further than I did. He trusted Carter, but not blindly. He gave him an opportunity but kept a safety line so that if his daughter was ever pushed into a corner, she could still pull herself back up. I carefully photographed every single page, then called Thomas. He must have been awake, because he picked up after the second ring. Maya, is everything all right, kiddo? It had been a long time since I heard him call me kiddo. It was how he addressed me when my dad was still alive, back when I used to run into the office bringing coffee for my dad and greeting Uncle Tom with a carefree smile. Just that one word was enough to soften my heart. Tom, I found the documents my dad left behind. The ones containing the clause to suspend Carter's executive power if he misuses company assets. Did you know about this? Silence fell on the other end, then Thomas exhaled, as if a burden hidden for years was finally being lifted. I did. Arthur once told me, if one day she calls and asks about it on her own, it means she's ready. I wasn't allowed to bring it up first because he was afraid you might act out of temporary anger and shatter your family. But if Carter has pushed it this far, I think Arthur wouldn't want you to endure it anymore either. I looked at my dad's portrait, my eyes stinging. Can you help me contact the legacy board members? I can, but you need to mentally prepare yourself. Once you open this box, Carter won't just sit still. He'll blame you, he'll blame me, he'll even blame your father if he has to. I replied softly. I'm no longer afraid of him blaming me. I'm only afraid that if I wait one more day, Noah and the company will lose even more. Just as I finished speaking, the screech of tires stopping abruptly echoed outside. I hung up, gathered the documents, and hid the envelope in my purse. The front door was thrown open, and Carter's voice boomed from the living room, irritated and reeking of alcohol. "Maya, if you're home, come out here. I'm starving." I stood up, took one last look at my dad's portrait, and walked out. Carter waslumped on the sofa, his dress shirt wrinkled, his wrists still sporting the watch I gifted him. And lingering on his collar was that faint smell of cheap perfume. He looked me up and down and frowned. "Where's dinner?" I stood a few feet away from him, strangely calm. "I haven't cooked." Carter froze, then let out a condescending scoff. "Are you starting to treat my words like empty air?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No. I'm just starting to treat your words with the exact value they deserve." The smirk faded from Carter's face. In that fraction of a second, for the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. He didn't know what I was holding in my purse. He certainly didn't know that starting tonight, the game he though the mastered had a new rule maker. Carter stared at me, his eyes already red from the booze darkening with anger. Perhaps in all his years of being my husband, had never imagined that the woman who always bowed her head to serve him dinner, who quietly washed every one of his shirts, who swallowed insults even in front of our son, could stand in the middle of the living room and talk back to him with such chilling composure. In Carter's mind, I only existed in two states, silently enduring or crying and begging. He wasn't used to a Maya who stood with a straight back, didn't avert their gaze, didn't have shaking hands, and didn't have a breaking voice. That sheer calmness irritated him more than a screaming match ever could. "What did you just say?" Carter growled, slamming his hand onto the coffee bowl, making a glass vibrate. I looked at the glass, then straight back at him. I said, "I'm starting to treat your words with the exact value they deserve, which means from now on, don't think that just because you raise your voice, I have to be afraid." Carter barked a laugh, but it was dry and harsh. "You spent a few days in the hospital and suddenly think you're important? I locked your card for one day and you were running around like a headless chicken. Without me, how are you gonna pay Noah's hospital bills? Without me, how do you even survive in this house?" Hearing him mention Noah with such flippant disregard still hurt, but the pain no longer dragged me down. It was like a smoldering ember. The more it was poked, the hotter it burned. "Do you even remember that Noah is your son?" Carter scowled. "Don't bring the kid into this to lecture me." "I'm not lecturing you. I'm just asking, when Noah was lying on the operating table, where were you?" Carter's face briefly tightened just for a split second before he masked it with his usual arrogance. "I already told you, I had important business. Men doing big things can't constantly run around dealing with household chores. Is a birthday party at a riverside resort considered big business?" The room fell dead silent. Carter's gaze snapped, like someone had violently yanked open the curtains he thought were tightly drawn. But Carter was a habitual liar, used to standing above people, so a few seconds later he just smirked. "Are you having me followed?" "I don't need to follow you. People post everything on the internet themselves." Carter shot up to his feet. "Vivian is just an employee. That was a client dinner combined with her birthday. Stop with your filthy delusions." I looked at the man in front of me. The man who had held my hand in front of our families, who had respectfully called my father Dad, who had held Noah when he was a newborn, and swore he would do anything for our family. Time is a terrifying thing. It doesn't just age people, it slowly peels away their layers of decency until the selfishness inside is left naked and exposed. You used $15,000 of company money to rent an event hall for Vivian. You Bowther an $8,500 bracelet. You locked my card the exact moment Noah was rushed to the ER. And you were planning to pull $35,000 from the employee welfare fund to cover up that expense. Carter, do you honestly think I still know nothing? This time, Carter stopped smiling. The color drained from his face rapidly, shifting from surprise to rage, and then to a cold, suspicious glare. He stepped closer to me, his voice dropping. "Who told you?" "I didn't back down." "Does it matter?" "It was Tom, wasn't it?" Carter gritted his teeth. "That old man betrayed me. Thomas didn't betray anyone. He just doesn't want my father's company turned into a private piggy bank for your mistress. Carter swung his arm and swept the glass off the table. The glass shattered against the floor with a piercing crash, the leftover whiskey pooling on Thettles like a stain that could never be wiped clean. In the past, just hearing the sound of breaking glass would make me flinch. I would have rushed to clean it up, terrified the neighbors might hear, terrified my mother-in-law would find out and scold me for not knowing how to keep my husband happy. But today, I just stood perfectly still. Your father's company? Carter sneered. He's dead, Maya. I am the one who has run this company for the past 10 years. The employees listen to me, the partners respect me, the banks deal with me. You think a few of his old papers are going to save you? I looked at him for a long time. So Carter did know about the documents. He just believed that time and my silence had rendered them useless. He believed that a woman isolated at home, cut off from money, oppressed by her mother-in-law, and despised by her own husband, would never have the courage to overturn what her father had left behind. You're right, I said softly. A few old papers alone won't save anyone. Boudad in the invoices, the ledgers, the wire transfers, Vivian's social media posts, the accountant's testimony, and the executive suspension clause. That's a different story. Carter's eyes darkened. You wouldn't dare. I replied calmly. If you dared to do it, why wouldn't I dare to expose it? Carter stepped in close, the stench of alcohol and cheap perfume from his shirt hitting me, making me nauseous. Maya, listen to me very carefully. If you want Noah to have a peaceful education, don't mess with me. I can make sure you don't get a single dime. I can make you lose custody. I can tell everyone you're delusional, insanely jealous, and trying to sabotage the company just to grab assets. Hearing those threats, my heart stung for Noah. But it was exactly because of Noah that I wasn't allowed to be weak. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app containing the recording of our entire conversation, and held the screen up to Carter's face. The sound of his own voice threatening me echoed clearly through the living room. Carter was paralyzed. From the moment he walked in, I had been recording. I said, I'm not doing this for emotional revenge. I'm doing this to protect myself and my son. Carter looked at me like I was a stranger. You've changed. No, I replied. I'm just going back to who I was before you made me terrified. Right then, Carter's phone rang. The screen flashed Vivian's name. He shot me a glare, then took the phone out to the balcony. Even though he lowered his voice, I caught snippets of the conversation. Vivian was crying, saying someone at the company was asking about the party invoices, that accounting was refusing to process her reimbursement forms, and that she was terrified the secret was out. Carter snapped at her to shut her mouth, told her he would handle it, and turned back to look at me with eyes full of hatred. I knew the wheels were already in motion. Thomas hadn't just secured the evidence, he had quietly alerted their remaining people with a conscience inside the company. For the first time in years, Carter was beginning to realize his power wasn't as absolute as he thought. I'm warning you one last time, Carter said, his voice raspy. Stop right now, and I'll pretend tonight was just you losing your temper. But if you keep pushing, don't blame me for being ruthless. I picked up my purse. You don't need to pretend anything. I've been losing my temper internally for 10 years. Tonight is the first time I'm completely sober. I walked past him toward the door. Behind me, Carter yelled. Where are you going? I paused for a second without turning around. Back to the hospital with my son. As for this house, I looked at the front door, feeling strangely light. A home isn't a place with high walls and expensive furniture. A home is a place where my son doesn't wake up having to ask if his dad is coming. I walked out of that house to the sound of Carter slamming his fist onto the table. Out in the yard, the tree my father planted swayed gently in the night breeze. I stepped through the gate and called a car to take me back to the hospital. In my purse were the documents my father left behind. In my phone was the first piece of evidence capable of causing Carter sleepless nights. But I knew that man wouldn't surrender easily. And the most terrifying backlash might not even come from Carter, but from the mother-in-law who always valued her son's prestige above the truth. By the time I got back to the hospital, it was close to midnight. The ER was still brightly lit, but the 7th-floor hallway was so quiet that my footsteps echoed distinctly. Each step reminded me that from the moment I left that house, I was no longer allowed to regress into the old version of myself. Outside Noah's room, I paused for a few seconds to steady my breathing and wipe the exhaustion off my face. I didn't want my son to see his mother walking out of a battlefield, nor did I want him to sense the storm quietly brewing behind us. Noah was asleep. His face turned toward the window, his eyelashes resting, his hand with the IV securely placed on the pillow. I sat down in the chair next to the bed and gently touched his warm hand. My heart suddenly melted into a sharp hash. Just a few hours ago, I was standing in front of Carter, facing the smell of alcohol, his threats, and his fake, authoritative glare. Yet now, in front of this skinny teenage boy, all my hardness dissolved into a quiet, aching pity. I wasn't afraid of losing Carter. I wasn't afraid of losing that cold house. I wasn't afraid of the insults my mother-in-law was about to hurl at me. The only thing I feared was Noah getting hurt once again by the cruelty of adults. Perhaps sensing my touch, Noah shifted slightly and opened his eyes. "Are you back, Mom?" "Yeah, I'm back. Does it hurt?" Noah shook his head ever so slightly. "Just a little. Did you see Dad?" I froze. Kids are sometimes far more perceptive than adults realize. Noah didn't ask if his dad was coming anymore. He probably already knew the answer. He only asked if I had seen his dad, as if harboring a tiny glimmer of hope that his father had at least worried about him in some way. I stroked his hair. "I did talk to Dad." Noah looked at me longer. "Is Dad mad at you?" That question hurt more than the sound of Carter smashing the glass. I didn't know how long Noah had been living with the fear of us being angry at each other. Since when did my son learn to assume that every disruption in our home started with Dad being mad at Mom, then Mom going silent, and then dinner sinking into an oppressive stillness? "It's not your fault," I said very slowly, letting every word sink into his heart. "Whatever is happening between Mom and Dad is absolutely not your fault. You just need to get better. I will handle the rest." Noah turned his face away. His voice so quiet I had to lean down to hear it. "Mom, don't endure it for me anymore." I went numb. Outside the window, the city lights blurred through the glass. I thought I had hidden it so well. I hid my resentment behind the sound of chopping in the kitchen. I hid my tears in the shower. I hid my humiliation after Carter threw money on the table and called me a freeloader. But Noah saw it all. He saw it with the eyes of a child who constantly pretended not to know, just to spare his mother more pain. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Noah shook his head. "I don't want you to be sorry. I just want you to be happier." It was a simple sentence, but it completely melted away the last bit of hesitation inside me. I held his hand and smiled, even though my eyes were burning, I promise. Near dawn, when Noah was asleep again, I stepped into the hallway to call Thomas. His voice sounded deep and exhausted. He had probably been up all night too. "Maya, I managed to get a hold of Philip and Eleanor. They were both on the board back in Arthur's time. They still hold minor shares and haven't been happy with the way Carter runs things for a while. They can meet you tomorrow morning, but you have to be absolutely certain you want to go through with this." I looked through the glass window at Noah. "I'm certain." Thomas stayed quiet for a moment, then continued, "There's something else." After Vivian's phone call, Carter called the head of accounting, ordering them to shred some old payment files and putting the internal servers into maintenance mode. "I think he's trying to cover his tracks." I gripped my phone tightly. "Did you manage to get copies?" "I backed up a portion, but not everything. If you want to secure the master data, you have to issue a formal document demanding the sealing of company records tomorrow morning, and it has to be signed by the controlling shareholder, which is you." Hearing the words "which is you" made my heart heavy. For years, I had let Carter speak for me, sign for me, and make decisions for me, to the point where I almost forgot I was never just an outsider. I was my father's daughter, the legal heir, Noah's mother, and above all, a human being with the right to stand up when pushed into a corner. "Please get everything ready for me," I said. "I'll be there tomorrow morning." But before I could hang up, the rapid clicking of high heels echoed from the end of the hallway. I turned around to see Mrs. Henderson marching toward me, wrapped in an expensive silk scarf, her face tight with rage. Right behind her was a relative from my husband's side, Aunt Teresa, the woman who always called me the virtuous daughter-in-law when she wanted to brag to the neighbors, but whose eyes were always searching for family gossip. Mrs. Henderson stopped right in front of me. She didn't ask how Noah was doing. She didn't even glance into his room. The very first thing she said was, "You have some nerve. Running out in the middle of the night, making Carter call me. Do you want this entire family to lose face?" I slowly put my phone in my pocket. "Did you come here to visit Noah, Mom, or to scold me?" Mrs. Henderson froze, then her face instantly darkened. "Is that how you speak to your mother-in-law? Noah being in the hospital is a sad thing, but you cannot use it as an excuse to rebel against your husband. Carter is a man, he's a CEO, he hashes pressures. If you, as a wife, don't know how to keep the peace and force your husband to go outside to find someone who understands him, you should really take a look at yourself." Aunt Teresa chimed in very softly from the side. "Maya, sweetheart, a woman's true strength is her endurance. If you push too hard, you're the one who's going to lose." I looked at the two women in front of me. I wasn't as angry as I thought I'd be, I just felt sad. Sad, because there are people who are so used to calling injustice keeping the peace, calling betrayal a man's needs, and calling a woman's tears her duty. "Mom," I said, my voice not loud but crystal clear, "Noah just got out of surgery. If you love your grandson, please keep your voice down. If you came here to defend Carter and insult me, then please leave." Mrs. Henderson stared at me, jaw dropping, as if she couldn't believe the daughter-in-law who had bowed her head for over a decade dared to show her the door in the middle of a hospital. She gritted her teeth, lowering her voice, but every word was as sharp as a knife. "Do you think you still have your father backing you up like the old days? Arthur is dead. The person feeding you now is me, son." I looked her dead in the eye. "My father is gone, but what he left behind is still here. And tomorrow, you will find out exactly who is truly standing on whose assets." Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted. Perhaps she didn't fully understand, but she sensed something was very wrong. Right at that moment, her phone rang. She answered it. Just a few seconds in, she went pale. I could faintly hear Carter's voice on the other end, rushed, panicked, entirely stripped of his usual arrogance. "Mom, tell Maya to stop right now. Someone at the company is pulling my files." I stood perfectly still, my mind strangely at peace. The wheels were turning, and this time, no one could force me to lie down and let them roll over me. Mrs. Henderson kept the phone to her ear, her face flushing from pale white to brightened. The way she looked at me was no longer just contempt, there was something else creeping in panic. For years, she was used to seeing me as a weak, subordinate daughter-in-law, a woman with no income, no voice in her husband's family, a woman who only nodded obediently even when being scolded. So when she heard Carter on the phone saying someone was pulling his files, she instantly understood that this was no longer a simple marital dispute. She hung up, stepping closer to me, lowering her voice, though every word still carried the weight of a stone. "Maya, what are you doing to your husband? Are you trying to destroy Carter's career? Whatever mistakes he made, he is still your husband, still Noah's father. A smart woman doesn't take an axe to the tree that provides her shade." I looked at her, my heart settling into an unnatural calm. "You're wrong, Mom. If the tree is rotting from the inside and casting a toxic shadow over my son's head, I have to chop it down before it crushes my whole family." Aunt Teresa hurriedly grabbed Mrs. Henderson's arm, likely afraid I would speak too loudly and draw attention. But Mrs. Henderson had been competitive her whole life, and used to having her son put on a pedestal. How could she swallow such a blunt comeback? She pointed her finger in my face, her lips trembling with rage. Don't think just because you got your hands on some papers you can do whatever you want. If something happens to Carter, you'll be left with nothing. The house, the cars, the money, he's the one taking care of all of it. Are you trying to put Noah out on the streets? At the mention of Noah, I felt a sharp pang in my chest. But it wasn't the old fear. I turned to look into the hospital room, where my son was still sleeping behind the frosted glass door, then turned back to speak to her, enunciating every word. Do not use Noah to threaten me. It's exactly because of Noah that I can no longer stay silent. I've been quiet for far too long. So quiet that Yorson thought locking my credit card while my child was in the ER was an acceptable thing to do. So quiet that you thought your grandson undergoing emergency surgery was a smaller issue than your son's prestige. Mrs. Henderson froze, unable to immediately find a comeback. Aunt Teresa looked at me, her gossipy stare replaced with an awkward unease. I didn't wait for them to say anything else. I simply opened the door to the hospital room, stepped inside, and gently closed it. Outside, Mrs. Henderson stood for a long time before walking away. The sound of her high heels faded down the hallway dry and cold, just like the family ties she always used as an excuse to force others into submission. The next morning, I left Noah in the temporary care of the nurse for a few hours. Before leaving, I leaned down and told him, Mom is going out to handle some business. I'll be back by noon. Be a good boy, and if you need anything, call me right away. Noah looked at me, his eyes much more alert than yesterday. Are you going to see Dad? I squeezed his hand. No. I'm going to see the people who can help me protect you. Noah stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. He didn't ask further questions, didn't try to hold me back. He only whispered, Be careful, Mom. That single sentence was enough to remind me I couldn't afford to be weak. I left the hospital and took a cab to a quiet coffee shop near the company, where Thomas had arranged to meet Philip and Eleanor. When I walked in, Thomas stood up first. His hair was much grayer than I remembered. Philip, who used to head the finance department when my father was alive, was a thin man with glasses resting low on the bridge of his nose. Eleanor used to be the head of legal. Her face was stern, but her eyes were very warm. Hello, Philip, Eleanor. Eleanor took my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Maya, it's been a long time. You look so thin. Just one normal, caring sentence was enough to make my throat tighten. Over the past few days, I had heard so much blame, so many accusations, that even a sliver of genuine kindness made my heart soften. But I wasn't there to cry. I pulled the folder of documents my dad left behind from my bag, laid it on the table, and unlocked my phone to show everyone the evidence piece by piece. No one interrupted me. Philip read through the financial ledgers meticulously, his face growing darker by the second. Eleanor reviewed the executive suspension clause, then looked at the venue invoices, Vivian's social media posts, and finally listened to the recording of Carter threatening me. Thomas sat beside me, his hands clasped together, bearing the heavy expression of a man who had watched the company decline for far too long without finding a way to stop it. After a while, Philip took off his glasses, his voice dropping an octave. Maya. If these expenses are confirmed to be company funds used for personal purposes, Carter won't just lose his executive power. He'll have to pay it back. And he could even be sued. I nodded. I don't want to make a massive scene out of vengeance. I just want to save my father's company, protect the employees' money, and protect Noah. Eleanor looked at me for a long time. You have to understand, the moment you sign the document demanding the files be sealed, Carter will know you've officially made your move. He might counterattack by airing out your family issues, manipulating internal communications, or smearing you as a crazed, jealous wife. I know, I replied. But if I stay quiet out of fear of being badmouthed, I'll truly be failing my father and my son. Eleanor gave a slight nod and pulled a drafted document from her briefcase, then signed this. As the controlling shareholder, you are formally requesting an emergency audit of all abnormal financial transactions over the past 6 months, a temporary lockout of access to accounting data, and the convening of an emergency board meeting within 48 hours. I took the pen. At the exact moment the tip touched the paper, I suddenly thought of my dad. If he were still alive, he probably wouldn't hug and comfort me like in the movies. He would just look at me with his strict eyes and say, "If you're doing the right thing, don't tremble." And strangely enough, my hand didn't shake. I signed my name and put the pen down. Thomas looked at my signature, his eyes turning a little red. Arthur has been waiting for this day. For a very long time, Maya. Before I could respond, Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face instantly changed. Carter is at the office. He just ordered the IT department to wipe the server access logs. Eleanor stood up immediately. "We have to go right now. If we're too late, the master data will be gone." I grabbed my purse, my nerves pulled as tight as a bowstring. But just as we were about to leave, my phone rang. It was the hospital. I answered it, my heart pounding. The young nurse's voice came through, panicked. "Maya, Mr. Carter just showed up at the hospital room. He says he's Noah's father and wants to process transfer paperwork immediately." I stood paralyzed. Carter hadn't shown up when his son was in the ER, but he showed up at the exact moment he needed to use Noah to force me to surrender. Listening to the nurse, my entire body went cold. Not out of fear of Carter, but because in that fraction of a second, I realized he had chosen the most cowardly way possible to counterattack. He didn't confront the evidence, he didn't explain himself to the board, he didn't go to the company to take responsibility for the stolen funds. Instead, he drove straight to the hospital where Noah couldn't even sit up yet to turn his own son into a psychological hostage. Toe dragged me out of this meeting before I could seal the records. "Please, stall him for me," I said, as quickly as I could, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Noah just had surgery. He cannot be transferred without the attending doctor's authorization. I am heading back right now." The nurse whispered, "Yes, the doctor said the same thing, but he's making a huge scene at the front desk, yelling that he's the biological father and has the right to decide." I gripped my phone so hard my fingertips went numb. "Do not let Noah leave that room. If you have to, call hospital security. I will take full responsibility." I hung up and turned to Eleanor and Philip. Eleanor understood immediately, without me needing to explain. "Maya, you go back to the hospital. We'll handle the company. Philip and Thomas will go. Your signature is already on this document, it's fully legally binding. We move on two fronts. Carter can't block both." Thomas nodded, his tone resolute. "You just take care of Noah. I will personally deliver this document to HR and accounting. If Carter tries to delete the data, I will demand an immediate access lockout based on your status as the controlling shareholder's representative." I looked at the three people standing in front of me, overwhelmed by a mix of profound gratitude and heartbreak. For years, I thought I was entirely alone. It turned out, there were people quietly standing by without fanfare, without promises, but the moment I truly stepped forward, they were ready to help me salvage the last shreds of decency my father had built. "I'm leaving it in your hands," I said, and rushed out of the cafe. In the cab on the way back to the hospital, I called Carter. He picked up immediately, as if he had been waiting for the call. "Finally learned how to be scared, did you?" Carter gave a cold laugh. "I'm filling out the paperwork to move Noah to another hospital. This one is too expensive, and since you don't have any money, stop trying to save face." I closed my eyes and swallowed my rage. Noah just had surgery. The attending physician hasn't cleared a transfer. Don't use our son's health to blackmail me. He's my son. I have the right to decide. When your son was on the operating table, where were your rights as a father then? The line went dead silent for a few seconds before Carter growled, "Maya, don't think I don't know what you're doing. You met with Tom and those old relics of your father's, didn't you? You think dragging them out is going to take me down? Let me tell you right now. If you don't stop today, I'm taking Noah. If you want to see your kid again, you can beg for it in court." I opened my eyes and stared at the gridlocked traffic ahead. The rage inside me was no longer a wildfire. It had settled into a razor-sharp lucidity. Try taking Noah out of this hospital against medical advice and see what happens. I will use that exact action to prove you are unfit to care for him. Carter scoffed. How are you gonna prove that? I'm recording this call. This time, the line went completely silent. I didn't say another word. I just hung up. A marriage that had deteriorated to the point where spouses had to record every conversation, there was truly nothing left to salvage. But I didn't feel regret anymore. I only felt relieved that I woke up before Noah got hurt even more. When I reached the 7th floor, a small crowd had gathered near the nurse's station. Carter was wearing a dark dress shirt, his face tense, holding his phone in one hand while pointing the other at the young nurse. Mrs. Henderson was also there, standing next to her son, repeatedly saying, his father wants to transfer him, what's wrong with that? Stop giving my family a hard time. I stepped forward. What family, Mom? The family that didn't have a single person show up when Noah was in the ER, but is now mobbing the hospital demanding to drag him away? Mrs. Henderson whipped around. You still dare to speak. If you hadn't caused such a scene, would Carter have to waste his time coming here? I looked at her, then at Carter. Did you come here for Noah, or for the company files that are currently being sealed? Carter's expression visibly shifted. It was only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for everyone around to realize my words weren't baseless. He stepped close to me, lowering his voice. Do you want to put on a circus in front of outsiders? I answered softly, but clearly. You're the one putting on a circus. Your son just got out of surgery, and you're using your rights as a father to force a transfer, when your real goal is to drag me away from the company audit. Carter, exactly how much lower can you sink? Just then, Noah's attending doctor walked up. He was a stern-looking man in his 50s, who is demanding the transfer of patient Noah. Carter immediately turned to him. I'm his father. I want to move him to another facility. The doctor looked at the chart in his hand and spoke slowly. Currently, the patient is fresh out of surgery. He is not medically cleared for a transfer unless there is a mandatory specialized reason. Moving him right now could severely compromise his recovery. The family needs to put the patient's health first. Carter frowned. I'll take full responsibility. The doctor looked him dead in the eye. Responsibility isn't just words. If there are complications due to a transfer against medical advice, the hospital will document everything. And with a minor patient, we must consider the input of the primary caregiver throughout the treatment process. From admission until now, that person has been his mother. That statement felt like a slap to Carter's ego. He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. You're real good. I didn't answer. I just opened the door to Noah's room and stepped inside. Noah was awake. His face was pale, his eyes full of panic. He had probably heard the shouting outside. As soon as he saw me, he whispered, Mom. I walked over to the bed and took his hand. I'm here. No one is taking you anywhere. Noah looked toward the door where Carter was standing. A long time passed before he quietly asked, Dad really wanted to move me? Carter was about to step inside, probably to say something, but Noah turned his face toward me. It was a very subtle gesture, but it made Carter stop dead in his tracks. For the first time, I saw a fracture in his eyes, not remorse, but the terrifying realization that he had lost control. I leaned down and told Noah, just rest. Mom will handle the adult stuff. Noah gave my hand a weak squeeze. I want to stay here. I trust you, Mom. Those words made every ounce of my exhaustion nearly vanish. Outside, Carter's phone started ringing incessantly. He looked at the screen, and his face instantly turned ashen. I knew that call had to be from the company. Thomas had probably delivered the legal document to exactly where it needed to go. Carter answered it, and just a few seconds later, his voice cracked completely. What? Who authorized a lockout on my access? I stood by Noah's bed, looking at the man who once thought he could control everything just by locking a credit card. Now, he was the one being locked out of the empire he thought he owned. Carter stood frozen in front of the hospital room door. The domineering aura from just moments ago completely drained, leaving him looking like a ghost. His lips were pressed tight, his throat bobbing repeatedly without a single coherent sentence coming out. I couldn't hear what the person on the other end was saying, but just watching the way his knuckles turned white from gripping the phone, I knew the company was no longer resting safely in the palm of his hand. The man who used to cut off his wife's funds with a single phone call, who ordered accountants around like personal servants, who thought every piece of paper could be altered in the shadows, finally understood what it felt like to have the doors of power slammed in his face. Mrs. Henderson stood next to him, anxiously pressing. "What is it, Carter? What's going on? Who dares to lock your access?" Carter didn't answer his mother right away. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with rage and sheer disbelief. As if I weren't the wife who had lived with him for over 10 years, but a complete stranger stepping out from his own shadow. Then he lowered his phone, grinding out every word. "Maya, you had someone lock my access?" I stood by Noah's bed, my hand still resting gently on my son's shoulder, my voice perfectly calm. I didn't have anyone do anything illegal. I just signed a document requesting the protection of company data from the risk of being deleted or altered. On what grounds? On the grounds of my shares. On the grounds of my father's will. And on the grounds of the clause you signed before you took the CEO chair. Mrs. Henderson snapped her head toward Carter. "What will? What shares? I thought you said that company was yours?" Her question shattered the facade Carter had maintained in front of his family for years. I saw a flash of rapid panic in his eyes before he masked it with anger. So, Carter hadn't just lied to him, he had lied to his own mother. He let her believe that the assets, the company, the house were all built by him. To give her more reason to look down on her daughter-in-law, to make his entire family view me as a lucky woman clinging to their brilliant son. A lie, when nourished for too long, becomes a shackle binding everyone who believes it. Carter gritted his teeth. "Mom, don't listen to her. She's just insanely jalousand trying to ruin me." I didn't argue with Mrs. Henderson. I just pulled out my phone, opened the photo of the agreement clause, and showed it to her. "You can read it yourself, Mom. If you don't believe me, the corporate lawyers will announce it tomorrow during the emergency board meeting." Mrs. Henderson stared at the screen, her eyes skimming the legal jargon she likely didn't fully understand. But she understood one thing: my name was there, my father's name was there, and Carter's signature was right next to it. Her hand trembled slightly. Aunt Teresa, who had somehow sneaked back in, stood behind Mrs. Henderson, craning her neck to look, her complexion shifting in tandem. Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice smaller, "What is the meaning of this?" Carter snapped. "Mom, will you shut up? I'm dealing with it." Mrs. Henderson recoiled, stunned that her son would yell at her in the middle of a hospital. I saw a flash of hurt in her eyes, and even though I had no sympathy left for her cruelty, I understood that feeling. She had spent her entire life believing Herson was brilliant, the pillar of the family, her pride and joy. So when the truth cracked open, the first thing she wanted to deny wasn't me, but her own foolishness. Carter's phone rang again. This time, he walked quickly to the end of the hall to answer it. I caught snippets of his frantic tone. "Do not open the file safe. I am the CEO. Who signed that order? Tom has no authority." Then his voice dropped, sharp as a blade. "Keep Vivian in the sales department. Do not let her talk to anyone." Hearing Vivian's name, I knew the next link in the chain was surfacing. If Vivian were just a mistress being showered with gifts, Carter wouldn't need to lock her down at the office. But if Vivian had signed for the money, had a care in her name, accepted an apartment rented with company funds, or even helped Carter legitimize the invoices, she was no longer an outsider. She was a crucial part of the illicit pipeline Carter had built using my father's assets. I leaned down and said to Noah, "You rest. Mom's going to step out for a minute." Noah looked at me, worried. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I'm fine. I just need to call Uncle Tom." Noah nodded, then whispered, "Don't let Dad yell at you anymore." I gave a very faint smile. From now on, I won't let anyone yell at me for no reason. Out in the hallway, I called Thomas. The background noise indicated he was still at the office. His voice was rushed but clear. "Maya, HR has stamped the receipt for the legal request. Accounting has also put a freeze on all suspicious vouchers. But there's a new development. Vivian just tried to leave the building with her purse. Inside was the secondary corporate seal from the sales department and a stack of event service contracts." I frowned. The secondary seal. Carter had previously authorized the sales department to use an internal seal to validate certain partner documents. If Vivian smuggled that out, they could forge backdated files to legitimize the missing money. "I had security stop her, but she's crying and claiming she's being framed," Thomas said. Listening to him, my blood ran cold. Carter hadn't just spent money on Vivian, he had given her the tools to tamper with corporate records. A man who betrays his family is terrifying enough, but an executive who puts his mistress in a position to touch collective assets is far worse. "Don't let anyone touch Vivian's bag without an official incident report," I said. "Ask Eleanor to draft it immediately. Get it on camera. Get witnesses. Don't give Carter any excuse to claim we set him up." "Understood. Eleanor is on it. Also, there's something else you need to know. In that stack of contracts, there's an event organizing file coded 11G. It requests an advance payment of nearly $300,000, scheduled to be wired this afternoon." I froze. 11G. The seemingly meaningless code suddenly loomed like a dark doorway. What event? The paperwork claimed it was a National Client Appreciation Conference, but the venue was a luxury resort in Hawaii. The dates coincided exactly with Vivian's birthday next week. The person who initialed it was Vivian, the final approver was Carter. I closed my eyes. So the $15,000 party was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it was 11G, a much larger, much more sophisticated payout. And if we hadn't blocked it in time, the money would have bowled out of the company on the exact day Noah was in the hospital. Right then, Carter walked back. He saw me holding my phone and probably guessed I had learned something new. His face tightened, but he suddenly softened his tone. "Maya, we need to talk in private. Let's not blow this out of proportion. No outsiders, no lawyers, no Tom. I admit I made mistakes, but the company situation is more complicated than you think. If you stop this, I'll unfreeze the cards, I'll take care of Noah, and I'll bring you home." I looked at him, almost laughing at the sheer bitterness of it all. Even now, his bargaining chips were the credit card he had locked, the house he had used to imprison me in silence, and the fatherly duties he should have willingly taken on in the first place. "Carter," I said slowly, "you have absolutely nothing left to hand out to me or my son as a favor." The fake smile on his face died. At that exact moment, my phone received a text from Eleanor. It was just one short sentence, but it was enough to shift everything into a terrifying new gear. "Secured the 11G file. It contains a forged signature of Maya." I looked up at Carter. This was no longer just an affair. It was no longer just embezzlement. He had used my name to sign off on a $300,000 withdrawal, and from that second, I understood this war was no longer just about saving the company, it was about protecting myself from a trap that had been laid out well in advance. I stared at Eleanor's text for a long time, so long that the letters in the screen started to blur. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood its implications far too well. A $300,000 file labeled 11G with my forged signature. That meant if the money was wired successfully, Carter wouldn't just be able to siphon funds for Vivian, he could shift the blame on Tommy at any given moment. The wife he looked down on, the one he locked out of accounts and called a freeloader, turned out to be the perfect scapegoat in his grand scheme. Because who would believe that a stay-at-home mom could understand the complex financial pipelines of a corporation? Who would listen to my explanations when my own signature was right there on the dotted line? Carter was still standing in front of me. His feigned softness had completely evaporated the moment he saw the shift in my eyes. He looked at the phone in my hand, then asked slowly, "What did Eleanor tell you now?" I looked up. "You forged my signature on the 11G file." The air around us seemed to freeze solid. Mrs. Henderson let out a quiet gasp. and Aunt Teresa covered her mouth with her hand. Carter didn't deny it immediately, and that split second of silence spoke volumes. But then, as always, he quickly threw on his armor of cold indifference. Don't talk nonsense. There are a lot of company documents, you probably signed it and forgot. I gave a very soft laugh. Do you think I'm stupid enough not to recognize my own signature? If I didn't sign it, who did? Tom? Or the people I brought in to frame you? I looked at the man standing in front of me. Suddenly, my heart didn't ache the way it had in the beginning. There are pains that, when repeated enough times, forge a razor-sharp clarity. I used to hurt because he had Vivian. I used to hurt because he abandoned Noah. I used to hurt because he let his mother humiliate me. But knowing he had used my name as a shield to steal money, what I felt was no longer pain, it was bone-chilling disgust. The person who had shared a roof with me for over 10 years, who ate the food I cooked, wore the clothes I washed, and called my son his son, could calmly prepare a trap so that when I outlived my usefulness, he could push me off a cliff and keep his own hands clean. Carter, I said slowly, you've gone way too far. He stepped in close, dropping his voice so low only I could hear. Maya, listen to me. That file hasn't been processed yet. If you stop right now, I'll have it shredded. No one gets hurt. You won't be implicated. I looked at him and asked, you forged my signature, and now you're talking like you're doing me a favor? Carter gritted his teeth. I am giving you a way out. No. You are looking for an escape route for yourself. In the hospital room, Noah shifted. I immediately looked inside and saw my son watching us with exhausted, fearful eyes. I didn't want him to hear any more. I pulled the door shut, then called Eleanor right in front of Carter. Eleanor, please draft a separate incident report regarding the forged signature. Seal the original 11G file. Back up the master servers. And secure the security footage of the archives room and the access logs from the past week. I will bring in a handwriting expert if necessary. Eleanor's voice on the other end was rock solid. I'm on it. Vivian has been crying and claims Carter orchestrated everything, but she hasn't agreed to sign a written statement yet. Philip is tracing the money flow. Maya, you have to be very careful. If Carter finds out Vivian surrendered the file, he might try topping everything on her or on you. I will come to the office tonight. No, you stay at the hospital with Noah. The emergency board meeting is tomorrow morning. We need you rested and sharp. I'll send copies of the files to our lawyers first. I said yes and hung up. Carter glared at me, his eyes pitch black. You're really bringing in the lawyers. Who do you think I should bring in for a fake signature? A psychic? Aunt Teresa couldn't hold it in and blurted out, Carter, if the forged signature is real, that's incredibly serious. Mrs. Henderson immediately snapped. Shut up. Why are you butting into their family business? But her voice wasn't as confident as before. She looked at Carter, her eyes filled with panic. Tell me the truth. Did you do it? Did you forge her name? Carter exploded. Mom, will you stop it? Do you believe me or her? Mrs. Henderson fell silent. That question was probably more brutal to her than anything I could have said. She had believed in her son her entire life, to the point of treating her daughter-in-law's suffering as an acceptable price for her son's success. But now, the truth was forcing her to look closely at the son she was so proud of. I didn't stick around to hear the rest of it. I went back into Noah's room. He was awake, his lips dry and cracked. I poured him a cup of water, helping him take small sips. Noah looked at me, his voice weak but clear. Did Dad do something bad? I froze. A question from a 16-year-old, no longer a little kid, but not quite an adult equipped to shoulder a fractured family. I didn't want to smear his father in front of him, but I definitely couldn't keep teaching him that staying silent in the face of wrong was how you preserved a family. All I can tell you is this, I said gently. Dad did some things that hurt a lot of people. When adults make mistakes, They have to take responsibility. But you did nothing wrong, and you don't have to hate anyone to be on Mom's side. Noah looked down at his hands. I just feel sad. I held his hand. I know. Dad never even asked if I was in pain. That single sentence nearly broke my composure. I turned my face away for a few seconds, swallowing my tears. From now on, Mom will ask you every single day if it hurts, if you're tired, what you want to eat, what you want to talk about. I will never let you endure it alone again. Noah gave a small nod and closed his eyes. I sat beside him, listening to his breathing slowly even out. Out in the hallway, Carter was constantly on the phone, his voice fluctuating between frantic pitches. He was probably calling people at the office, calling Vivian, calling anyone who could help him block tomorrow morning's meeting, but things were no longer easily manipulated. The 11G file was secured, the fake signature was discovered, and most importantly, the woman he intended to use as a pawn was no longer standing still on the chessboard. Near noon, Thomas sent me a long text message. He wrote that Vivian had finally signed a preliminary statement. She admitted to receiving instructions to prep the 11G event file, but claimed she didn't know my signature was forged. She said Carter told her Maya already approved the family paperwork. Along with the message, Thomas attached a screenshot from the company hallway security camera. It showed Carter and Vivian entering the archive room after hours, 3 days before Noah was hospitalized. I looked at the photo, my blood running cold. 3 days ago. That meant this wasn't a sudden reaction to my pushback. The trap had been set long before, even while my son was writhing in pain. While I was cooking dinner, doing the laundry, and trying to keep things normal for Noah, Carter was quietly planting my forged signature on a $300,000 withdrawal file. And that afternoon, just when I thought I had seen the absolute bottom of his cruelty, Eleanor called. Her voice was more serious than ever. Maya, I just found an additional appendix in the 11G file. If those funds go missing, the first person legally liable to pay it back isn't Carter. It's you. I closed my eyes. The trap wasn't just to siphon money. It was built to ruin me completely. I sat down in the chair next to the bed, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to Eleanor slowly read the contents of the appendix. Every word felt like a noose tightening around my neck. On paper, the representative approving the $300,000 advance wasn't Carter, nor was it Vivian. It was May acting as the legacy family shareholder, positioned as the guarantor responsible for reimbursement if the event didn't happen or the receipts were invalid. In other words, if that $300,000 was wired out and vanished, I would be the first person ordered to pay it back. I would be the first suspect in an embezzlement scheme. I would be the one forced to stand before the board to explain myself. Maya, are you still there? Eleanor asked softly. I'm here, I replied, my voice remarkably calm. Please, keep the original safe for me. Do not let Carter or anyone else touch it. It's already sealed. Our lawyers are on their way to the office, and Philip has sent a request to the bank to halt the 11G transaction. But you must be present at the board meeting tomorrow morning. This is no longer just about Carter's violations. You have to prove you weren't involved. I opened my eyes and looked at Noah sleeping. My son had just gone through surgery. His face was still pale, but the hand resting on the blanket was warmer than yesterday. I wanted to stay by his side. I wanted to put all the outside battles on hold just to cook him a bowl of soup, wipe his face, and tell him peaceful little stories. But life doesn't always let you choose the lesser pain. If I didn't walk into that meeting room, the 11G trap wouldn't just swallow me, it would swallow Noah's future too. I will be there tomorrow, I said, and hung up. I walked back out to the hallway. Carter was still there, but his aggressive demeanor had noticeably deflated. He looked at me, trying to maintain a calm tone. Maya, I think we really need to talk. No outsiders, no lawyers, no Tom. I stood a few feet away. You want to talk about 11G? His eyes twitched. He hadn't expected me to be so direct. I told you. Corporate filings are complicated. You wouldn't understand all of it. But I understand my own signature. Carter bit his lip. Maybe an assistant. pulled the wrong template. Maybe someone down the ladder made a mistake. I will look into it. I looked at him, and suddenly, every single time he had shifted, the blame flashed before my eyes. The food is too salty? My fault for being a bad cook. Noah is too quiet? My fault for spoiling him. He comes home late? My fault for not being a better wife. The company is stressed? My fault for not being supportive. And now, a forged signature on a $300,000 document was the fault of an assistant. An underling. Someone nameless. Anyone but him. Carter, do you know what your biggest problem is? I asked. He frowned. You always think everyone else is stupider than you. You thought Vivian would obey you forever for money. You thought Thomas was too old to fight back. You thought your mother would always defend you, right or wrong. You thought Noah was too young to understand. And you thought you had terrified me so much that, even if I was framed, I wouldn't dare open my mouth. Carter stared at me, his jaw clenched tight. You're awfully confident. No. I'm just finally sober enough to stop signing my life away with my silence. Mrs. Henderson had stood off to the side listening to everything. Her expression was no longer as fierce as before. She looked at Carter, then at me, her lips moving but unable to form words. Perhaps she wanted to question her son more, to scold me more, to cling to the belief that this was all just a misunderstanding. But the shards of truth were raining down too fast for her to pick them up and cover for Carter anymore. That afternoon, Carter left the hospital. Before he left, he stood outside Noah's room for a long time. Noah was awake, but when he saw his father, he just gave him one glance and turned his face toward the window. The gesture wasn't loud, it wasn't accusatory, but I knew it hurt more than any words. Carter knew it too. He stood frozen for a few seconds before walking away, his back stiff like a man who had just lost something, only realizing he never knew how to hold on to it in the first place. That evening, Noah managed to eat a few spoonfuls of soup. I sat next to him, feeding him slowly, and heard him ask softly, "Do you have to go tomorrow, Mom? To Grandpa's company?" He looked at me. "Is that company really Grandpa's?" I nodded. Grandpa built it from scratch. Later, he left it to me. But I let your dad run it. Because I thought, as a family, we should trust each other. Noah was quiet for a moment. Is Grandpa mad at you? I choked up. His question hit the deepest wound in my heart. I looked out the window, where the city lights were flickering on, and whispered, Grandpa is probably sad. But I think he'd rather see me fix my mistakes than just sit around crying. Noah nodded. Then you should go, Mom. I'll wait for you here. I smiled, reaching out to ruffle his hair. Aren't you scared? I am. But I trust you, Mom. For the second time that day, my son told me he trusted me. A woman can survive a tremendous amount of trauma just from a sentence like that from her child. I kissed Noah's forehead and promised him I would ask the nurses to keep a close eye on him before I left the next morning. When night fell, I couldn't sleep. I opened all the evidence on my phone, arranging it chronologically. The locked card, Noah's ER admission, Vivian's party, the jewelry receipt, the abnormal expense ledger, the 11G file, the forged signature, the liability appendix, the security footage of Carter and Vivian in the archive room. When placed side by side, the disjointed puzzle pieces formed a chillingly clear picture. Carter didn't just betray me, he had prepared to sacrifice me for his greed. Near midnight, I received a text from an unknown number. It was brief. Maya, it's Vivian. I want to meet you before the meeting tomorrow morning. I have something that can save you, but you have to promise to protect me. I stared at the text, in no rush to reply. Vivian, the woman who bragged that Carter froze his wife's card just to choose her, was now claiming she could save me. I didn't trust her, but I knew that when a cornered prey is afraid of being left behind, it will bite the hand that fed it. I texted back, meet me at the office tomorrow morning. The lawyers will be present. A long time later, Vivian replied with a single word. Okay. I set my phone down and looked at Noah sleeping, feeling calmer than ever. Tomorrow morning, Everyone would walk into that boardroom. Carter, Vivian, my mother-in-law, all the people who treated me like a shadow would have to listen to me speak using my own name. The next morning, I left the hospital while Noah was still asleep. Before I went, I asked the nurse to watch him closely, then stood by his bed looking at him for a long time, as if just staring long enough could gather all the courage I still lacked. He was in a light sleep, his brows occasionally furrowing from the pain, but his hand was warmer, his breathing steadier. I leaned over to fix his blanket and whispered, "Mom's going out for a bit, then I'll be back. Today, I won't let anyone use my name to do bad things anymore." I arrived at the company around 8:30 a.m. The 10-story building on a busy street was packed with people coming and going like any other day. But in my eyes, everything was different. This was the place my father used to bring me when I was little. He would show me the wood shops, the blueprints, the veteran craftsmen, and tell me that a company isn't built on money alone, but on the trust of the people working in it. Yet for years, I had allowed Carter to turn that trust into a cloak for his greed. Thomas was waiting for me in the lobby. As soon as he saw me, he walked over. His voice low but firm. "Maya, everyone is here. Carter is too. Vivian is in the adjacent room with the lawyers and Eleanor." Mrs. Henderson came with Carter and nodded. "Tom, are you tired?" He paused for a second, then gave a sad smile. "I'm only tired because I let this go on for too long." I looked at him and replied softly, "It's not your fault. I was the one who stayed silent for too long." We stepped into the elevator. As the metal doors closed, I looked at my reflection. The woman in the mirror was still thin, still sporting dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights, but her posture was straighter. I wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a simple white blouse and black trousers, my hair tied back, minimal makeup. I wanted to walk into that room not as a wife throwing a jealous fit, not as a betrayed woman out of control, but as Arthur Hayes' daughter, as Noah's mother, as someone with the right to demand the truth. The large conference room on the 9th floor was already open. Philip, Eleanor, the corporate lawyers, and several legacy board members sat on one side. Carter sat at the head of the table, his face devoid of emotion. His suit was so immaculate that anyone who didn't know the situation might mistake him for a wrongfully accused CEO maintaining his composure. Beside him sat Mrs. Henderson, her expression heavy. The way she looked at me lacked the arrogance of the past, but still held the stubborn defensiveness of a mother refusing to believe her son was wrong. Carter saw me walk in and smirked. "Finally decided to show up. I thought you only knew how to hide behind Tom." I pulled out a chair, set my purse down, and said calmly, "I'm here for the company, not for you." Eleanor opened the folder in front of her, her voice ringing out clearly. Today's meeting was convened at the request of Maya, the legal controlling shareholder, to review abnormal transactions related to File Code 11G and several personal expenses showing signs of misappropriation of company assets. Carter tapped his hand lightly on the table. I object to that phrasing. These are just incomplete internal procedures. Do not let my family issues affect the company. Philip looked at Carter over his glasses. "Carter, if this were just a family issue, the board wouldn't be sitting here. But when there is a $300,000 file, a suspected forged signature, and an advance payment prepped to leave the company accounts, this becomes a corporate governance issue." Mrs. Henderson hurriedly interjected. "Whatever you all are saying, you need evidence. My son has been the CEO for years. The company is thriving. You can't just wipe away his hard work over a few words from my daughter-in-law." I looked at her without anger. I just felt profoundly settled. "You're right, Mom. We need evidence. That's exactly why I came here today." Eleanor signaled a staff member to turn on the projector. Document after document appeared on the screen. The $15,000 venue invoice, the $8,500 jewelry receipt, the luxury apartment lease in Vivian's name, the luxury car paid through the corporate account, the 11G file, the liability appendix bearing my name, and finally, the security footage of Carter and Vivian entering the archive room after hours. With every document that appeared, the room grew a little quieter. Carter was no longer smiling. Mrs. Henderson stared at the screen, the hands resting on her purse trembling slightly. Carter still tried to maintain a hard front. These expenses can be explained as client entertainment, partner relations, and business gifts, all perfectly normal. As for Maya's signature, I didn't handle that personally. The boardroom doors opened, and Vivian walked in. She had none of the glamour from the photo in the red dress by the river. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy, and she was clutching a document folder tightly to her chest. When she saw Carter, she flinched slightly, like someone terrified of being dragged back into the trap she had just escaped. Carter scowled. "Who let you in here?" Eleanor answered for her. "I invited Vivian in to testify in her capacity as the person in charge of the 11G file." Vivian stood at the end of the table. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out clearly. "I am here to state that the 11G file was prepared under Mr. Carter's direct instructions. Originally, he said it was a client appreciation event, then he ordered the location changed to a resort in Hawaii and added several private expenses to the contract. The signature of Maya on the appendix was not signed by her. I didn't forge it myself, but I witnessed Carter hand a sample of Maya's signature to an outside contact to have it replicated." The room practically exploded in dead silence. Mrs. Henderson shot up from her chair. "You're lying. You're his mistress. You're just trying to pass the blame to save yourself." Vivian burst into tears. "You can yell at me all you want, ma'am, but I have a recording." She pulled out her phone and handed it to Eleanor. An audio clip was played, and Carter's voice echoed out, low and chillingly clear. "Maya's signature is just in case we need someone to take the fall. She doesn't know anything. If anything happens, just say she agreed to it as a family shareholder. What does a stay-at-home mom know about corporate filings?" No one said a word. Even Carter froze. He glared at Vivian like he wanted to crush her right then and there, but in front of the board, he could do nothing but clench his jaw. I sat still, listening to my own husband call me a clueless stay-at-home mom, listening to him calculate how to make me take the fall. And strangely enough, I didn't cry. My tears had probably dried up at the hospital after Noah's question, after the night I opened my dad's envelope. Right now, the only thing left inside me was a razor-sharp clarity. I stood up. I moved that the board immediately suspend Carter's executive authority, freeze all records in their current state, and refer the evidence of signature forgery and misappropriation of company assets to the legal authorities. Furthermore, I demand that Carter be barred from accessing all corporate data, documents, and bank accounts pending the investigation. Carter shot up. "Maya, you dare destroy me?" I looked him straight in the eye. "No. You destroyed yourself. I just refuse to take the fall for you anymore." Philip was the first to raise his hand to vote. Then Eleanor, then the rest of the board. Hand after hand went up. Slow but decisive. The color drained entirely from Carter's face. The man who had mockingly asked if his wife had realized her mistake was now standing in the boardroom his father-in-law built, watching the seat of power slip through his fingers. "Mrs. Henderson slumped back into her chair, her lips trembling. This time she didn't yell at me. She just looked at Carter, her voice raspy. "Son, did you really do that to your wife?" Carter didn't answer. And that silence was the most brutal answer of all. When the meeting ended, Eleanor walked over to me and whispered, "Maya, the hardest part for the company is temporarily over. But the family fallout, custody of Noah, and the assets that were siphoned away are still battles ahead." I looked out the glass window at the street below, where cars kept moving as if a life hadn't just collapsed and another hadn't just stood back up. I thought of Noah in the hospital, thought of my dad, thought of the years I had lost. "I know," I said, "but starting today, I'm not taking another step backward." I returned to the hospital in the afternoon, when the harsh sunlight had mellowed out across the long glass windows of the hallway. I was no longer carrying the heavy stack of files from the morning, but inside my heart, there was a very deep, quiet stillness. Like someone who had just walked through a massive hurricane, not quite ready to celebrate surviving, just feeling an overwhelming exhaustion because they were finally allowed to breathe. Noah was sitting up in bed, resting his back against the pillows. The nurse had just helped him take his medication. When he saw me walk in, he looked up immediately. His eyes were tired, but much brighter than the past few days. "You're back, Mom." Just those few words made my heart soften. I walked over to him, set my bag down, and gently stroked his hair. "I'm back." "Were you a good boy today?" Noah smiled faintly. "I'm not a little kid anymore. To me, you'll always be my little kid." Noah stared at me for a long time, as if trying to read everything that had just happened on my face. "Did you win, Mom?" I sat down on the edge of the bed. I had thought about telling him something simple, that everything at the company was resolved, that Dad was suspended, that the 11G file was sealed, that Mom was no longer trapped by a forged signature. But looking into Noah's eyes, I understood he wasn't just asking about a board meeting. He was asking if, from now on, his mother would ever have to bow her head again. If his dad would still use yelling to suffocate our home. If the two of us would still live in vague terror every time Carter's phone rang. I held his hand and said slowly, "I wouldn't call it winning, but I finally earned the right to stand on the side of the truth." Noah stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Then that's good." That evening, Thomas visited the hospital. He brought a bag of fruit and a container of hot soup, saying Eleanor sent it for Noah. He stood by the bed, looking at Noah with the kind eyes of a man who had watched the boy grow up from the days he used to tag along with me to the office. "Get well soon, Noah. Your grandpa's company is waiting for you to grow up and visit." Noah replied politely, "Thank you, Uncle Tom." After Noah went to sleep, Thomas stepped out into the hallway to talk to me. He said the board had agreed to bring in an independent auditing firm to review all expenses from the past year. The accounts related to 11G were frozen. The assets bought with company funds for Vivian would be placed on a recovery list. Carter was temporarily barred from accessing corporate files, the corporate seal, and bank accounts. As for the forged signature, the lawyers advised me to file a formal request for handwriting analysis to protect myself from any attempts Carter might make to deny it. I listened to everything, nodding, but my heart was no longer racing like before. "Tom, did I make things even more chaotic for the company?" He looked at me, his voice dropping. "Maya, a rotting house doesn't stay standing just because you refuse to touch it. You didn't make it chaotic. You just turned on the lights so everyone could see where it was broken." I looked out at the hospital courtyard, where a few patients' families were sitting quietly under the trees. "My dad must be so disappointed. Arthur would be sad that you had to suffer. But I believe he'd be incredibly proud that you knew exactly when to stop enduring it." I didn't answer. My eyes just stung. This time, I didn't try to swallow my tears. I let them fall gently. Not out of weakness, but because finally, after years of bracing myself, I allowed myself the dignity to grieve properly. 3 days later, Noah was discharged. The day we left the hospital, Carter showed up. He stood at the end of the hallway, completely stripped of his surrogates. The suit he wore was still expensive, the watch was still on his wrist, but his face was gaunt, his eyes exhausted and lost. Mrs. Henderson came with him. This time she didn't scold me, nor did she bring up the family's prestige. She looked at Noah, her lips trembling. "Noah, Grandma is sorry. I didn't even ask if you were in pain the other day." Noah looked at her, his eyes far calmer than a boy his age. "I'm fine now, Grandma." Mrs. Henderson burst into tears, but Noah didn't step forward to hug her. I didn't force him. Someone's need time, and you can't force a child to instantly forgive just because an adult is belatedly remorseful. Carter looked at me, his voice raspy. "Maya, can we talk?" I told Noah to head down to the car with Thomas, then stayed back to face him. Right in the middle of the hospital hallway where everything started with a locked card and a son waking up from surgery. I looked at the man who used to be my husband. I didn't feel a raging hatred anymore, just a very real, very heavy exhaustion. "What do you want to talk about?" Carter lowered his head. It took him a long time to finally say, "I was wrong. I used to think I had been waiting to hear that sentence for years. I used to think that if one day Carter admitted his mistakes, maybe the trauma inside me would heal. But when the words actually came out, I just felt they were far too late. You weren't just wrong to me, I said. You were wrong to Noah, to my father, to the company, to the people who trusted you. And you were wrong to yourself for thinking money could cover up everything. Carter clenched his fists. I will fix it. You fix it by taking responsibility. Not by begging Meadow come back. He looked up, panic in his eyes. Maya. I shook my head. I will be filing for divorce. I will seek custody of Noah according to the law. If you truly still love your son, don't drag him into a tug of war. Be a decent father from now on, even if it's late. Carter stood frozen. Mrs. Henderson, standing behind him, heard everything. She opened her mouth to say something, but then just looked down at the floor. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she understood that some homes cannot be saved with the phrase, "A woman must endure." Some men cannot be saved by their mothers, constantly defending them. And some daughters-in-law, once they've been silent for too long, will never turn back once they finally walk away. A few months later, things gradually stabilized. The company entered an auditing and restructuring phase. Philip helped with the finances, Eleanor handled the legal side. Thomas stayed by my side like an old family relative. I wasn't brilliant right away, but I learned every single day how to read financial reports, how to run staff meetings, how to look at a number and understand the sweat and tears of the people behind it. On the nights I came home late, Noah would be sitting at the dining table waiting for me, a warm bowl of soup in front of him. He would smile and say, "I made it a little bland today, just bear with it, Mom." I would eat it, tears threatening to spill. Because it turned out, happiness wasn't a massive house, nor was it a credit card with an unlimited balance. It was a simple meal, with someone who genuinely waited for you to come home. Vivian left the company. After signing a full written confession, she had to return a portion of the assets she received and cooperate with the lawyers in the ongoing investigations. I never saw Vivian again, and I didn't need to. Some people walk into your life like a knife wound. But if it weren't for that knife, maybe I would never have realized the coat I was wearing had rotted away long ago. Carter lost all his executive power, had to reimburse multiple misappropriated funds, and faced legal proceedings regarding the 11G file. He occasionally texted to check on Noah, and once, Noah agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near our house. When he came back, he didn't say much, just, "Dad looks thinner, Mom." I asked if he was sad. Noah looked out the window and replied, "Yes. But I don't wish for Dad to be like he used to be. I just wish for him to live a better life." Hearing that, my heart felt light. My son had grown up amidst the wreckage, but he didn't let the ruins turn him bitter. That was probably what I was most grateful for. On a late afternoon at the end of the year, I took Noah to visit my father's grave. The wind at the cemetery blew through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh grass after the rain. I laid a bouquet of white flowers in front of Arthur Hayes' headstone and bowed my head for a long time. "Dad, I'm here. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you taught me. But from now on, I will never hand my life over for someone else to keep. Your company, I will learn to protect. I will protect Noah. And I will live my own life with dignity." Noah stood beside me, gently taking my hand. His hand was bigger than I remembered, warm and steady. I looked at my son and smiled. In the distance, the afternoon sun fell softly, not glaring, not blindingly brilliant, but bright enough to let you see the road ahead. The story ends there, not with a loud, dramatic revenge, but with the awakening of a woman who was once treated as a shadow. I lost a marriage, lost years of my youth, lost my trust in the man I once called my husband. But I kept my son, I kept my father's legacy, I kept the company, and most importantly, I kept myself.